Scotland. Secretary David Mundell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and with permission I'd like to make a statement on the operation of the Sewel Convention and its application to the European Union Withdrawal Bill in relation to Scotland. Mr. Speaker, these are serious times and serious issues, and I've come to this House today with respect and ready for constructive debate, and I hope that that is the spirit on all sides. Lord Sewel set out a commitment in 1998 that there should be a parliamentary convention to recognise that where the UK Parliament legislated in a devolved area, it would, and I quote, not normally legislate without the consent of the Scottish Parliament. Throughout the passage of this bill, the Government has demonstrated its commitment to the Sewel Convention and the principles that underpin our Constitution. We've followed the spirit and the letter of the devolution settlement at every stage. The EU Withdrawal Bill is about ensuring that the whole of the United Kingdom has a functioning statute book on exit day. It's about providing legal certainty to businesses and individuals up and down the country. From the outset, we've been clear that as a result of the UK's exit, we would expect to see a significant increase in decision-making powers of the devolved institutions. We've been clear that exit would provide the opportunity to bring powers home from Brussels, not just to the UK Parliament, but to all legislatures of the United Kingdom. We must remember that the powers in question were handed to the European Union through our membership in 1972, long before devolution existed in Scotland. Exit was neither anticipated nor provided for within the Scotland Act and the structure of the devolution settlement. So it is clearly fair to say, as Mike Russell, the Scottish Government's own Brexit Minister, has said, these are not normal times. Nevertheless, we've sought to respect the devolution settlements at every turn and recognise the strength of feeling across this House, as well as within the devolved administrations, that the original measures set out in the bill did not meet aspirations. No one could deny that this government has come a long way from that original position. Discussions have been conducted at multilateral level through the JMCN and the JMCP, chaired by the Prime Minister, bilaterally between administrations, and extensive official level engagement, and we have made significant changes to the bill. These changes enabled the Welsh Labour Government to support the agreement and to gain the approval of the other place and this House. And these changes have seen the original clause turned on its head. Now, all decision-making powers returning from the EU that intersect with devolved competence will pass directly to Cardiff, Edinburgh and Belfast, unless explicit steps are taken to temporarily preserve an existing EU framework. The intergovernmental agreement underpinning the new clause set out how those steps should be taken, with an emphasis on collaboration and agreement. Together, this means we are emphatically delivering on our commitment to give significant further powers to the Scottish Parliament. The clause also provides, in certain limited cases, the current arrangements we have under the EU will remain until we have implemented our new UK-wide frameworks. I want to stress that we have already agreed with the Scottish and Welsh governments where this temporary preservation needs to be considered. The governments are agreed that freezing areas is likely to be in just 24 of the 153 areas of power returning to the UK from the EU. And to anyone who has sought to present this as seeking to take powers back from the Scottish Parliament, I repeat here that this bill includes a specific provision that makes clear explicitly that no decision-making powers currently exercised by the Scottish Parliament can be taken away. These amendments strike the right balance between ensuring exit results in increased decision-making powers for the devolved legislatures while continuing to provide certainty about how our laws will operate and protecting our UK internal market, a market so vital for Scotland's businesses. These amendments do not and cannot go as far as the Scottish Government want, because the Scottish Government want a veto over arrangements that will apply to the whole of the UK. But as Lord Wallace, the former Deputy First Minister of Scotland, set out when this bill was being debated in the other place, this was not part of the original devolution settlement. Our approach also helps to ensure the continued integrity of that UK market, which I've said is so vital for the people and businesses of Scotland. At every stage, the SNP has disregarded the need to preserve this market and ensure that there are no new barriers to working or doing business in the UK. The UK internal market is worth over 4 times more to businesses in Scotland than EU trade, and we must make sure it is preserved as we leave the EU. We've reached a point now where, as the Welsh Labour Government have clearly stated, these arrangements reflect and respect how the devolution settlements operate. The devolved legislators will have a formal role in considering where existing frameworks need to be temporarily preserved. This is what we have delivered. However, Scotland has 2 democratically elected parliaments, and it is only this Parliament, the UK Parliament, that can speak for the UK as a whole. It is deeply regrettable that Nicola Sturgeon's SNP Scottish Government was unable to sign up to the compromise solution brokered by officials from all the administrations working together. But, Mr. Speaker, as we all know, you can only reach agreement in a negotiation if both sides actually want to reach agreement. The Scottish Government's position from the outset was that they would be content with nothing less than a veto. However, such an unreasonable position would fundamentally undermine the integrity of the UK internal market. This would harm business in Scotland and the rest of the UK. Despite the numerous attempts to find compromise and the fact that one was reached with the Welsh Labour Government, the SNP position has not changed. As a result, this government, which represents the whole of the UK, could not responsibly accept their position. We are now faced with the reality that the Scottish Parliament has not given consent for this critically important legislation that provides certainty across the UK. That is not a situation that any of us would have chosen. It is not, however, a crisis, nor is it unforeseen. Whilst devolution settlements did not predict EU exit, they did explicitly provide that in situations of disagreement, the UK Parliament may be required to legislate without the consent of devolved legislatures. In any situation, agreement is our aim, and we'll continue to seek legislative consent, take on board views and to work with the Scottish Government on future legislation, just as we have always done. Mr. Speaker, we on this side of the House have compromised. We've made every effort to reach agreement. We have sought consent. Now we are legislating in line with the Sewel Convention to ensure the whole of the United Kingdom leaves the EU with as much legal certainty as possible. That's what people and businesses in Scotland need.
Sweeney.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Secretary of State for advance sight of his statement. On Tuesday, we had a situation where the Secretary of State for Scotland allowed his government to ride roughshod over the wishes of the Scottish Parliament within the space of around 20 minutes. From where I stand, the Secretary of State has done nothing about the programme motion that we opposed, meaning that he was entirely complicit in the shambles that we all witnessed on Tuesday night, meaning that Scottish, Welsh and Northern Irish members were entirely shut out of the debate. The Labour Party opposed this week's programme motion for a whole host of reasons, one of which was because of the lack of time to discuss devolution. The Labour Party forced the government to have 2 days of debate on the withdrawal bill rather than the original 12 hours. In stark contrast, the Secretary of State voted for the programme motion and voted for Scotland's voice to be silenced. And to blame this on the opposition for voting on the Lord's amendments is as ludicrous as it is misleading. What happened this week is completely and utterly unacceptable. We have seen shabby and deplorable antics from the Tories when it comes to the time allowed for debate, and we have seen counterproductive antics from the SNP yesterday that further curtailed debate. The people of Scotland deserve better, and they simply want to fix this mess by the politicians that they sent here to stand up for them before this shambles ends up in court. As John Smith said back when he was creating the Scottish Parliament, there are two people sawing away at the legs that support the Union. One is the Scottish National Party, who, of course, want to destroy the unity that is the United Kingdom, but the other is the reckless Conservative Party, which is stubbornly clinging to an unsustainable position and refused to debate, never mind seek any compromise or consensus on these most critical matters that the future of our nation relies upon. The Secretary of State was responsible for taking the Scotland Act of 2016 through this place. He was responsible for inserting the Sewel Convention into the legislation, and now he is the person responsible for trampling all over that convention that underpins the devolution settlement. The Labour Party tabled amendments to Clause 11 of the bill at every stage. The Secretary of State and his colleagues voted them down every time. These amendments would have ensured that the Joint Ministerial Committee would have had to report to this place and would have had to have published the minutes of their meetings. That would have allowed people in Scotland to see exactly what has been going on behind closed doors. The Secretary of State voted that down. We proposed amendments that would have ensured that any common UK frameworks that his government seemed to value so much, would not be forced upon the Scottish Parliament. The Secretary of State voted that down. We have proposed amendments that would have ensured that the Scottish Parliament had to give its consent unless the matter related to international obligations, which the Secretary of State will know is entirely in line with the Scotland Act. Yet rather than allow us to even just debate that amendment, the Secretary of State allowed Scotland's voice to be shut out of the debate altogether. The Secretary of State promised that he would fix this mess that his government created, yet he's done absolutely nothing. He is Scotland's invisible man in the Cabinet. The leader of Scottish Labour and the Shadow Secretary of State have both written repeatedly to the Deputy Prime Minister asking for cross-party talks to find a solution. So far, those requests have been denied. One really does have to wonder whether the UK Government and the Scottish Government actually have any intention whatsoever in sorting this out for the people of Scotland. So I would like to ask the Secretary of State, will he here and now accept the offer of cross-party meeting to resolve this and uphold the devolution settlement? Section 22 of the EU Withdrawal Bill allows for consequential amendments to be made to the bill where it is appropriate. Has the Secretary of State explored this avenue, and is he open to consequential amendments under this section if a deal is struck between the Scottish and UK governments? Can the Secretary of State tell the House what mechanisms are available for members of this House to debate the issue, given there was no debate at all this week? Will the Secretary of State now agree to publish the minutes of all meetings of the Joint Ministerial Committee that pertain to the EU negotiations? Does he have any regrets about how this situation has been perceived in Scotland? And finally, if there is no agreement between the Scottish and UK governments, will he resign? Because it's very clear that he does not have either the confidence, leadership or ability to fix this matter of critical importance to the future of our country.
Mr. Speaker, I do have one regret, and that is to see the once proud Scottish Labour Unionist Party move onto this nationalist territory. And it was a real disappointment that Labour MSPs have been willing to go along with everything proposed by Nicola Sturgeon. That is something to be regretted. And when it comes to interpreting the devolution settlement, I'm not going to rely on the honourable gentleman. I'm going to rely on other people like John Smith who were responsible for bringing it about and are now in the other place representing the Labour Party. And they accepted these proposals. They accepted these amendments, as did people like Lord Jim Wallace, who was the Deputy First Minister of Scotland, who says clearly these proposals do not in any way undermine the devolution settlement. And he and his Welsh colleague, the prospective First Minister of Wales. Are his comments to be rubbished and dismissed? When he said the amended bill and the intergovernmental agreement that goes with it does both things we set out to do. It safeguards devolution and it safeguards the future of a successful United Kingdom. I do hope, Mr. Speaker, that the Scottish Labour Party still want a successful United Kingdom.
Ross Thomson.
Just to point out that I don't need scripts, I make my own notes. My right honourable friend said in his statement that the Sewel Convention states that this Parliament will not normally legislate in devolved areas without the consent of the Scottish Parliament. But Mike Russell, Scotland's own Brexit Minister, stated himself that these are not normal times when he introduced the illegal continuity bill in the Scottish Parliament. So either the fast-tracking of the continuity bill was unnecessary, or the Sewel Convention does not apply. And therefore, does my right honourable friend agree with me that the SNP should get their toys back in the pram and get back round the table?
Well, Mr. Speaker, and in case it should arise in future questions, I don't intend to comment on the reference to the Supreme Court. That is a matter which is still ongoing. I do agree with my honourable friend's final statement. It's vitally important that the Scottish Government and the UK Government continue to work together. And I have been very perturbed over the last 48 hours by the veiled threats from the Scottish Government that somehow they would withdraw from such discussions. These are vitally important. The people of Scotland expect their two governments to work together. At this moment, there is negotiations between my colleague, the Secretary of State for the DWP, and her counterpart in the Scottish Parliament in Edinburgh. That's the sort of engagement that people want to see. The transfer of powers from this Parliament in relation to welfare and engagement with the Scottish Government as to how that's successfully done.
Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, I have to say to the Secretary of State for Scotland, is that all you've got?
Yep.
Is that the best you can do? I mean, these are very serious times for Scotland. And I should thank the right honourable member for advanced sight of his statement, but I'm deeply, deeply disappointed by its content. Mr. Speaker, my very quick take on paragraph 24 of the Secretary of State's statement is it's a wholly new interpretation and indeed inversion of the constitutional arrangements. While section 28(7) of the Scotland Act confirms that Westminster retains its unlimited sovereignty, and arguably it can never relinquish that, the devolution and settlement provides through the Sewel Convention that the legislative power will not be used if there is a disagreement and the devolved legislators do not give consent. Paragraph 24 effectively turns Sewel on its head and says that if there is disagreement, i.e. no consent on a legislative consent motion, that the UK Government can proceed to legislate. This is an extremely serious development in UK Government thinking that risks the security of the devolution settlement. It also gives lie to the assertion in paragraph 26 that UK Government is legislating in line with the Sewel Convention. By its own admission in paragraph 24, it is doing the opposite. And perhaps the Secretary of State can give us clarity on what is happening here. The Sewel Convention, Mr. Speaker, is clear. The UK Government should not legislate on devolved matters without the consent of the Scottish Parliament. Well, Mr. Speaker, the Scottish Parliament denied that consent, not the Scottish Government, the Scottish Parliament, the Scottish National Party, the Labour Party, the Liberal Democrats and the Greens. We have all said that we do not give consent to what the UK Government is seeking to do. Yet the Secretary of State comes before us today with excuses, attempting to save his own skin, knowing that he has totally shafted Scotland and the people of Scotland. Empty excuses are clearly all he has, having utterly failed in his role as Secretary of State to protect our devolution settlement and to stand up for Scotland, what he should be doing. He promised that Scotland's Parliament would become the most powerful devolved Parliament in the world. Wrong. He promised us in common stages that when the bill came back from the Lords, there would be time to debate Clause 11. Wrong. He told us that there would be a powers bonanza for the Scottish Parliament. Wrong. Even in June 2016, he pledged to protect Scotland's place in the single market. Wrong. Indeed, the Secretary of State for Scotland has downgraded...
Do you find this amusing?
Keep it up, that's
Order. The right honourable gentleman must be able to complete his contribution. Yes, really? Yes. So, what was that? Somebody chunted from a sedentary position? Surely not. Well, no, he will be enabled to complete his contribution. Mr. Ian Blackford.
You know, I would simply say to honourable and right honourable members opposite that the UK government's own analysis has indicated that a hard Brexit is going to damage jobs. And what do we see? What do we see? We see Conservative members of Parliament laughing. Laughing at the hardships that people of Scotland might face. Mr. Speaker, the Secretary of State for Scotland has downgraded devolution, ignored the Scottish Parliament and silenced Scotland when he supported the withdrawal bill, despite our Parliament, his Parliament, rejecting it. Will the Secretary of State now apologise to the people of Scotland for his series of broken promises? The Secretary of State has failed to protect devolution. He has failed to protect the Scottish Parliament. He has failed to protect Scottish interests. Having plunged Scotland into constitutional crisis, will he finally do the right thing? If he has any dignity, if he has any self-respect, resign and do it now.